This is absolutely one of my favorite Tucker Carlson interviews of all time because it perfectly illustrates my point that if you don't understand money and banking and economics, you will be taken advantage of by the people who do enjoy it.
We have a republic and use this democratic process. What happened in 1913 is the bankers took control of monetary policy. Monetary policy is I control the process by which currency is issued, including through credit. So I generally govern and control credit issuance.
Yes.
And from that, the currency, the creation and management of the currency. What they're trying to do now is take control of fiscal policy. Fiscal policy is when I control the taxes and the borrowing of the U.S. government. I call it a financial coup. I think what happened was when the budget deal busted in 1995, they gave up on the government. They just said, this form of government will not work as a governance structure to manage the dollar system. So I think they decided, okay, we're going to re-engineer government on the just do it method. And the first thing we're going to do is we're going to pull all the money out. We're going to put the government in a debt trap, and then we'll squeeze it and shift to the control model. This is the Boston Tea Party moment. Can they tax without representation? And then the question is, who are the real owners? And that's the mystery. And I've spent my whole life trying to figure out who are the real owners. And basically, from what experience I've had, if you know their name, they're not one of the important owners. Do you know what I mean? It's
Yes.
intergenerational pools of capital. Now, here's what's interesting. One of the most powerful pools of intergenerational capital that I've ever dealt with is the Harvard Endowment. And if you look at the squabble going on over who controls the Harvard Endowment right now, it's a very interesting squabble. The university is only a portion of the Harvard Corporation. The Harvard Corporation runs the university and it runs the endowment. Okay. And the Harvard Corporation, in my experience, is one of the most important investment syndicates in the world. And because they have a tax exemption, they don't have to pay taxes. And my theory is it was the model that was really created to sort of compete with the Vatican and the Catholics, who had 2,000 years of diplomatic immunity and no taxes. If you look at the group of people who meet through the BIS,
what's that?
The BIS is the Bank of International Settlements, and it's the central bank of central banks.
Where is that located?
It's in Basel, Switzerland. It has 63 of the most powerful central banks as its members, and the New York Fed and the Fed are both shareholders. They became shareholders in 1994.
In one sentence, what's the purpose of the Bank of International Settlements?
Okay, so there are two things you need to know about the Bank of International Settlements. It has sovereign immunity.
What does that mean?
It's above the law.
It's its own country.
Right. It's its own country. It has its own police force. No one has the legal authority to move against it. Okay. It has sovereign immunity. That's number one. Number two, it can move money and hold it on its balance sheet and manage money secretly. So if I want to, I'm grossly oversimplifying, if I want to steal 21 trillion from the U.S. government and park it on the balance sheet of the BIS, it can move it anywhere in the world and it can keep it on its balance sheet secretly.
Why would there be an organization? First of all, where does its power? Who empowered it to have sovereign immunity in the right?
It was created after World War I, collected its powers and got going in the 30s. And it was created in theory to manage the reparations of the German government. But if you read the real history, it was because the Bank of England and the central bankers wanted an entity that had sovereign immunity. They wanted to be able to move money secretly. So there's a wonderful book called The Tower of Basel by a wonderful Hungarian journalist where he documents and describes the whole history of the Bank of International Settlements. And if you want to understand power in this world, understanding how the Bank of International Settlements and the plumbing of the central banking system works is very, very important. If you ever saw, Washington Post did a project, it was in 2010 or 12, called Top Secret America, and put together a database of all the different top secret installations that had been built in the country, including since the Patriot Act. And what you saw was just this explosion of money in building so many, both underground and above ground facilities. How do a few sneak up on the many? Well, you have to do it very quietly and visibly before you throw the trap. So essentially what they're building, because it's converting a currency system into a control system. So it's really the end of currency. And what they're doing is they've been building the different digital pieces. And when it integrates and comes together, then you literally have a digital concentration camp. It's complete and utter control. What we're talking about is a system where you can surveil, control, and influence one person at a time. And with AI and software, each person can have their custom surveillance, influence, nudging, and control system.
And punishment.
Yes, enforcement. So go back and think of the pandemic. So if I say you can't go more than a mile from your home, and I say you have to be mandated a pharmaceutical, then if you don't take the pharmaceutical, I can turn off your money. If you go more than a mile away from your home, your money and your credit cards won't work. In 2020, when the pandemic started, or it was October 2020, so the pandemic was underway, the general manager of the Bank of International Settlements was on an IMF panel. And in 1 minute, it's the first time in my life I ever saw a central banker tell the truth. I fell off my chair. And he said, the beauty of this is we can set the rules on how your money works, and we have the technology to enforce them. So before she was nominated, 3 weeks before, she wrote an article in the Vanderbilt Law Review that said the great thing about central bank digital currency, in other words, an all digital currency system, is you have the perfect tool to deal with inflation. If inflation gets out of hand, you just freeze everybody's bank accounts.